Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my privilege to introduce to you today, for a little bit of press availability and questions and answers, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development for Nigeria, Dr. Akin Adesina. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, and Dr. Adesina is pursuing an aggressive agricultural transformation agenda. Early results from policy reforms and strategic engagement with the private sector leave the country poised to make agriculture Nigeria's new oil and benefit millions of farmers, including women and youth. Minister Adesina is here at the World Food Prize event to talk about the unique approach that Nigeria is taking to build a productive and profitable agriculture sector, and to the success that they've had to date. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Minister Adesina.
Thanks very much, Megan. I just wanted to say that from Nigeria, many of you will know Nigeria as a country with oil. And that's okay, but nobody drinks it, and nobody eats it. Nigeria used to be a dominant player in the agricultural space in the 1960s. We were the largest producer of cocoa in the world at the time. We were also the largest producer and exporter of palm oil, crude palm oil at the time. If you look at us in terms of cotton production, we were the largest producer of cotton in West Africa at the time. So those were the great days when agriculture was taken very seriously in Nigeria. But when we found oil, we abandoned agriculture. And we paid a very big price for that. We started spending ridiculously high levels of money importing basic things that we should be producing back at home. And therefore exporting jobs when you should be creating jobs at home, wasting our own foreign resources, foreign exchange, imported food, and creating a lot of rural poverty, because agriculture gets done in rural areas, and therefore if you're not spending that much in rural areas, you grow rural poverty. And so when President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan came into office, he made a very important decision that we had to end that. We had to end the decades of being a net food importing country. We have the potential to grow food. Two of the largest rivers in Africa are in Nigeria. River Niger, River Benue, they're in Nigeria. Nigeria has 84 million hectares of land, which are variable land, which means that we have the potential to grow our food. So we have the water, we have the cheap labor, we have great sunshine, great people. Nigeria has, therefore, in my view, absolutely no business importing food. Nigeria should be a net exporter of food. And so we launched the Agricultural Transformation Agenda 2 years ago. And that agenda is to take agriculture to become once again the centerpiece of the economy, so that you can create inclusive growth that lifts a lot of millions of people out of poverty. And for that to happen, that agriculture has to be a different kind of agriculture from the one we've done before. It has to be agriculture as a business, not agriculture as a way of life, not agriculture as a development activity. And so we set very clear goals for ourselves when we started, that we will add 20 million metric tons of food to our domestic food supply by 2015, that we will create 3.5 million jobs all across the value chains by 2015. And for that to work, we also had to start a number of fundamental reforms. And the biggest reform we started was the reform of the fertilizer sector and the seed sector. Because if farmers can't get seed and fertilizers, you can't actually raise your productivity. If you look at the fertilizer sector in Nigeria for decades, it's been one that's probably one of the most corrupt things you ever saw. Because the government spent about 5.8 billion US dollars, which is about 873 billion naira on fertilizer subsidies between 1980 and year 2010. But no more than 11% of that ever got to farmers, which apparently means that about $5.1 billion of that, just disappeared. And that's because government was buying and distributing fertilizers. That's not the job of government. And the first thing we started was to end that corruption in the fertilizer sector of 40 years. Under this president, it took us 90 days to do that. We took the government out of buying and selling fertilizers and seed, and we released it to the private sector to do that. So very important. Second is that we decided that farmers had to get their seeds and fertilizers directly from the private sector, not from government. And so today in Nigeria, the private sector seed companies and fertilizer companies sell directly to farmers, no longer to government. So big shift. The third is that how do we then target the farmers? And so we started Africa's first ever national database of farmers. We began by registering our farmers to know their identity, to give them identification cards with their biometric information. Therefore, we can reach them better. As of this year, we have registered 10 million farmers with full biometrics now on them. Then we decided to use mobile phone technology to reach our farmers with subsidized seed and fertilizers that they can get from private sector. And that system is called electronic wallet system. A farmer gets the electronic coupon, and they use that to buy their seeds and fertilizers from the private sector. It worked. Nigeria is the first country, not only in Africa, but in the world, to develop that electronic wallet system for getting subsidized farm inputs to farmers. In our last year, 1.5 million farmers got their seeds and fertilizers via their phones. And second, by this year, we have already reached 5 million farmers. That means that by this year, we've already impacted 25 million persons within farm household. That's what happens. We've restored dignity back to our farmers. We brought transparency, probity, and accountability back into how public funds are spent. And that's the way it should be. The job of a minister is not to sign contracts. The job of a minister is to set policies that make things work. And I think that's an example of what we've done. And many countries are wanting to copy that, including India, Brazil, and also China. The electronic wallet system, I mean. Now, in the last 1 year, we've also been able to revolutionize cassava. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world. And I'm determined that we are going to be the largest processor of cassava in the world. It's not just that you have comparative advantage producing, you must have competitive advantage transforming it into higher value products. So we launched a cassava transformation strategy, which includes transforming cassava into starch, cassava into high quality cassava flour that you use to replace some of the wheat that we are currently importing, as well as using cassava also for making ethanol, as well as dry cassava chips for exports. The last 1 year, we've been able to secure 3.2 million metric tons of dry cassava chip export contracts to China, which, when we complete, will allow our farmers to get about $843 million in terms of income. So you can see that this is really creating more opportunities for our farmers. We launched 1 year ago a policy to become self-sufficient in rice. Because we spend 365 billion naira every year importing rice. That's well over $1 billion. And it doesn't make sense because we can grow rice everywhere in Nigeria, upland rice, lowland rice, irrigated rice. And so we started a really major program to do that. But what has been achieved in the last year is very impressive. In the last 1 year, main season and dry season, Nigeria produced 50% of all of its rice needs in terms of rice paddy. We did it in one dry season and one main season. We produced a total of 1.8 million metric tons of additional rice paddy in the country. And all we need to be self-sufficient in rice is 3.2 million metric tons. So that tells you the policy reforms are working. And private sector investment in agriculture has just skyrocketed in Nigeria because what we run is a private sector driven, government enabled transformation agenda. The job of government is to provide public goods. It's not the job of a private sector to build a road or to provide power. That's the job of government. And so we've been able, in the last 1 year, seen $4 billion in private sector investment, letters of intent, commitments to the sector, just because of the private sector approach that we've done. And just finally, in the last year as well, we've been able to see a tremendous amount of impact in terms of jobs. We've been able to stimulate 2.5 million jobs, both farm jobs and seasonal jobs, and also jobs across the value chains in just 1 year. So I am fully convinced that the future of Nigeria is not in oil. The future of Nigeria is in agriculture, but in agriculture as a business. And that's why I'm very excited to be at this Borlaug dialogue, because I think if we are going to leave millions of people out of poverty, it's by making agriculture a business that does that, not as a way of life. So thank you very much. Yes, please.
I know scientists are...
If you can tell me your name.
My name is Adelaide Arthur from Joy News, Ghana.
Joy News, yeah.
Yeah. I know scientists are busily trying to contain the cassava blackstreak disease that they say is spreading quickly in East Africa. As the world's highest producer of cassava, they say if it gets to West Africa, well, we are the second largest producer of cassava. So if it gets to West Africa, you can imagine the disaster it will cause there. So I want to find out from you what kind of interventions you have put in place to ensure that the cassava blackstreak disease, the cassava mosaic disease does not get to your country. Because if it gets to your country, it gets to ours too.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's true. I think, the issue with cassava blackstreak disease and cassava mosaic virus are very serious disease for cassava. But the solution to that is to have good surveillance. We've already launched a surveillance system with IITA, with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, to delineate the areas in which this disease is actually spreading, so that we can actually contain it through quarantine methods. Second is the solution to this is to have resistant varieties. A number of resistant varieties are there for cassava brown streak disease virus. And so we are going to multiply that and make that available to farmers. And finally is just to recognize that there is a project that is called West African Agricultural Productivity Project. It's a World Bank funded project which looks at agriculture in a regional basis. And one of the things we're looking at is how to promote dissemination, wider dissemination of cassava, more resistant cassava varieties.
I'm Minister Adesina, Dave Ramaswamy with Africa Agribusiness Magazine. One of the issues with, you mentioned the policy reforms and changes, one of the issues confronting governments in Africa, including Nigeria, is policy continuity across governments, and especially when government changes. What are 3 things that you are doing in your tenure to ensure policy continuity for both domestic and international investors? And the second part of the question is, you mentioned agribusiness or agriculture needs to transform from subsistence into a business. But you have millions or thousands of graduates from agriculture universities in Africa who their goal is to work for the government or get some other job, like an office job in the private sector. What are you doing to ensure that agriculture is an attractive career option for young Nigerians? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. In terms of policy continuity, I think the most important thing is that you will never want to continue or sustain policies that are not working. And I get questioned all the time, how are we going to sustain all these great things that we're doing in Nigeria? For me, that's a great thing, that people are talking about how do you sustain all these major reforms that we've kicked in. Now, the ways in which I think this will be done is first and foremost to recognize the critical importance of institutions. Because individuals are very important for catalyzing change, but it is actually institutions that sustain change. And so as a Minister of Agriculture, I'm putting a lot of my attention on actually building strong institutions. First and foremost is that in the Ministry of Agriculture in Nigeria, for decades, people were used to agriculture as you just produce, okay, and that's it. No, but that's not agriculture. You produce, you've got to be able to store, you've got to be able to process, you've got to be able to transport, you've got to be able to export. It's a value chain thing. So the mindset in the Ministry of Agriculture in Nigeria today is changed radically to recognizing that agriculture is a business, and it's a value chain that you must look at, not just seed or just fertilizers. We are going to be creating a department in the ministry, a federal department for agribusiness within the Ministry of Agriculture, which will have experts, not just people with MBAs, masters in finance and investment, that can create one-stop shops that investors can come to when they come to the ministry. When I'm not there as Minister of Agriculture, there will be structures in place, people with expertise to handhold and help investors to invest in our agriculture sector. And finally is the part of the institutional reforms that we're doing is also to build a new extension system that can actually get technologies to farmers. Our extension system broke down in 1980. The World Bank used to fund what they call agricultural development projects. When the project stopped being funded by the World Bank, the extension system collapsed. So today, for the first time, we are putting together, establishing a federal department of agricultural extension that will actually have institutional approaches for getting extension done. So critical thing is building institutions. The second thing I think is getting the National Assembly, our own politicians who are in the Senate and the House of Representatives, to appreciate the importance of the reforms. And they are excited about the reforms, because the reforms is about repositioning Nigeria's economy from being unimodal, dependent only on oil, to one that focuses on agriculture, that has the greatest power to create jobs than any other sector. And just to give you an example of how that has happened, I mentioned the growth enhancement scheme, where we give subsidized inputs to our farmers via mobile phones. A public hearing was held by our House of Representatives, and lasted about 3.5 hours. And at the end of it, there was farmers there, House of Rep members, and researchers, everybody else. The conclusion of the House of Representatives Committee on Agriculture was that this is the most fundamental reform they've seen in agriculture, probably since independence, because it gets technologies to our farmers directly without political interference. And they said they will actually develop a bill by themselves to make the growth enhancement scheme of Nigeria a law, that no minister after me will be able to ever change that. And that tells you the impact of that policy for our legislators, that they're going to make it into a bill. So about sustaining the policy, that's one. Second one. The third aspect of it is that it has become now understood in the country that agriculture is not that thing that you do in a rural area. Agriculture is part of the economy. It's a central part of the macroeconomy. If you look in Nigeria today, the inflation rate, it's 8%, and it's going lower. And that's because we are producing a lot more food. In 1 year, last year, we produced an additional 9 million metric tons of food because of our policies. And that has brought the price of food down. Inflation continues to go down. So the Minister of Finance, the central bank governor, myself, we all understand that agriculture is not a project. It's a central part of the macroeconomy of the country. So I think those are things that are very important going forward to actually sustaining the reforms. In terms of youth in agriculture, I think what you find in Nigeria and also in other African countries is a paradox, that people will go to medical school and they will practice as doctors. People will go to school of pharmacy and practice as pharmacists or lawyers. But when they go to school of agriculture, they're looking for jobs. And that's because of a mindset that they don't understand that agriculture is a business. And that we've changed today. The government started, we launched a program, the president launched a program on September 3rd, which is called Youth Employment in Agriculture Program. That program will create a new cadre of young commercial farmers and agribusiness entrepreneurs for Nigeria to replace our rapidly aging population of farmers. Because if we do not change the labor composition of the agriculture sector in the next 10 years, there will be no farmers left to feed Nigeria in the future. And so that will be a security problem. And so we're launching this program. It will create 750,000 of them over the next 5 years. They will be provided with access to land in our states, access to technical skills, managerial skills, and access to finance. This, if I can put it in a different way, will be the black belt farmers for Nigeria. For Nigeria to become an agriculturally industrialized economy, we need to get our youth to do that. And so agriculture can create a lot more of those jobs. And practically, like last year, for example, we did a dry season rice cultivation program, first time ever as a government. And it led to creation of jobs of about 466,000 youth that would have been there doing nothing, creating mayhem, now back at work working. That's the power of agriculture in creating jobs.
I have a question about...
Sorry, what's the name?
All right.
What's the name, please?
My name is Sai Gabanso, and it's okay. So I had two questions for you. The first was about the role of nutrition in food security, and how, when you are producing an additional 9 million metric tons of food, how you're ensuring that it's not just additional quantity, but also there's like quality and diversity of food, especially for women and children. My second question is that with your focus on having agriculture become a business in Nigeria, how do you ensure that the small farmers don't completely lose out on that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Sarah. Now, on the issue of nutrition, let me say that Nigeria, in June of this year, was recognized by FAO and given an award for actually meeting its Millennium Development Goal, number 1, on hunger, 3 years ahead of schedule. And that's a huge development for us. That's because we've been able to produce a lot of food. We were able to reduce by half the number of people that suffer from hunger just within a short period of time. Now, but as long as one single child goes to bed hungry, the job is not completed. And so we are mindful of the issue of malnutrition. Malnutrition is high in 2 parts of Nigeria, northwest and northeast Nigeria, where we also have high level of stunting. Sometimes in some of these areas, the stunting rate could be as high as 41%. So both malnutrition, wastage is high. And so the focus of government now is to actually improve nutrition within those areas. How are we doing it? First and foremost is to promote biofortified crops. For example, cassava. Nigeria released pro-vitamin A cassava just a year ago. And these varieties actually have loaded with a lot more vitamin A, which are very good to deal with issue of blindness. If you don't have vitamin A, you have a lot more blindness problems. We've also released orange flesh sweet potatoes that also have vitamins A precursor in them that you can actually help for nutrition. Secondly, is we are promoting the soybean in the north. We are going to do a lot more soybean actually from next year, because soybean is important for nutrition at the household level, but also for maintaining soil fertility. Without having to depend too much on fertilizers by poor households. Now, the other one is high energy foods. If you go to school and you're not well fed, you're not going to pay attention in school, you're not going to achieve much in school, so the output of the education system will be negative, or at least low. So we've decided that we need to take some of our staple crops and turn them into high energy foods that we can use in school feeding programs. We're working today on sorghum. Nigeria is the largest producer of food sorghum in the world, food sorghum. We produce 9.4 million metric tons of it. But America is the largest producer of feed sorghum in the world. American farmers that are producing that are very rich. The Nigerian farmers producing sorghum are very poor. The reason is that we're not adding value to sorghum. So we've decided to change that. we've just launched a major program to turn our maize, soybean, and sorghum into high energy foods in Nigeria. The World Food Program buys 99% of all of its high energy foods from Asia. It doesn't meet the needs of Africa. It doesn't arrive on time. It's not culturally acceptable. It doesn't create markets here. And yet we can produce high energy foods in Nigeria. So now Dancer Food, which is part of Aliko Dangote's food, has put up 36 million euros to set up in Nigeria what would be Africa's largest high energy food plant, which will process maize, soybean, and sorghum into high energy foods for use in school feeding programs, but also in supplying high energy foods to other countries in the region, especially in the Sahel, where you have also high levels of malnutrition. So we are doing quite a lot in terms of that. On the smallholders and privatization, I think that people get so afraid of growth. I am not. We should not be afraid of growth. What we should do is to expand possibilities for smallholder farmers via markets. I'll give you two good examples for that. Take the case of when I became Minister of Agriculture, I found out that the farmers in the country that were growing cassava, 45% of their cassava was under the ground. There was no market for it. So by not creating markets, you are actually just simply multiplying poverty. And so we decided that we had to get the private sector in to process and add value to cassava. Well, who are the people producing the cassava? The smallholder farmers. So you create markets that way. The way I look at market is it's almost like if you have somebody that is in a ditch, you can either ask them to crawl out of the ditch and they fall back in every time they try, or you put a crane there that can pull many people out. That's what market does. And so the most important thing then is empowering the smallholder farmers with access to land, access to finance, access to information, access to extension, so that they can participate effectively in markets. And that's what we are doing in Nigeria. But I don't believe in poverty reduction. I don't. Because if somebody has malaria, and I come from a malaria endemic country, you can't say you are reducing malaria. You have to eliminate malaria. And the fastest way to get rid of poverty is to create wealth. That means you have private sector expanding opportunities, and then you help smallholder farmers to connect to those opportunities, and that's how we're doing it. And just a last point on that, there is no land grab in Nigeria. Absolutely not. Because we are doing land reforms that actually allows our farmers now to have access to land titles that will allow them to have access to land titles. So nobody's going to be able to take away their land. So that's the way we're doing it. Yeah.
Jeff Osler from Africa Agribusiness Magazine. My question is, well, first of all, I wanted to commend the ministry for understanding the importance of post-harvest losses. And I know Nigeria has begun to purchase many, many different silos. Can you talk a little bit about the quantity of what you're doing? And what I'm actually concerned about a little bit is it seems there are larger silos, and from our market, which is the smaller farmers, there's a 5 metric ton or 10 metric ton within the villages themselves that need to be purchased as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you've already purchased and what you plan on purchasing?
Well, the fact is that post-harvest losses are very high. And that's a reflection of poor farm household storage, farm-level storage. It's also a reflection of the fact that you have poor road networks, and therefore it's very difficult for the farmers to connect themselves to markets. Now, the way we're dealing with that is over the last 2 years, we have increased our storage facility, our silo capacity, from 400,000 metric tons when I took over as minister, today to 1.3 million metric ton silo capacity in the country. That's huge. And that's what we use for our strategic grain reserves. And that has helped us. Last year, when we experienced flood, very devastating flood, we released 40,000 metric tons of grain out of our strategic grain reserves to deal with the impact of that flood. However, managing those silos is extremely expensive. And I think it's an important market infrastructure, but it doesn't have to be managed by government. And so I have just directed that they all be concessioned to the private sector, so the private sector will use them to do warehouse receipt system. I mean, actually for agricultural commodity exchange development in the country. In addition to that, we are working now on well-conditioned warehouses. Our plan is to have 800 of those, one in every single local government of the country, that will allow farmers to store their crops and not having to lose it, and they can sell when the prices are much higher. And so it's really about, again, government building infrastructure, but letting the private sector actually take advantage of that to help farmers to better connect to markets.
Are the silos being built within the country, or are they being purchased right now and brought in?
No, the silos are already completed. They're in the country. Yeah, but what we are trying to do is we signed an agreement with a group called Bloomberg. It's an American company. And Bloomberg is going to invest $250 million in Nigeria and actually assemble the warehouse facilities in Nigeria.
We only have time for one more question. This gentleman.
My name is Abdallah. My name is Abdallah El Kurebe, Newswatch, Nigeria. Minister, sir, what is Nigeria's concern in reaction to the Global Harvest Initiative's report that the Sub-Saharan Africa would only meet up with 25% of food demand?
Of food?
Food demand.
Yeah. Well, the challenge for food in Africa has always been there. So that's not new information. What has been the challenge for us in Africa has always been that we've always treated agriculture as a way of life, something left for poor people in rural areas. And therefore, that affects the lenses with which we solve the problem. Africa today has 60% of all the available arable land in the world that is not cultivated. So that means that if the world is going to actually feed, the billions of people by 2050, where's the land going to come from? The land is there in Africa. But then we've got to exploit that, optimize that, and not just play around with poverty, where you simply managing poverty as opposed to creating wealth. And so I think there needs to be a lot more done in investing in agricultural research in Africa. There needs to be a lot more effort put into market development for the crops of farmers so they can actually cultivate more. There needs to be a lot more private sector investments, not only to produce but to process in Africa. And then finally is to improve household nutrition themselves, especially for women. Women form majority of our smallholder farmers. We've got to make sure they have access to secure land, access to finance, access to extension market price information to take advantage of that. And there actually has to be, in my view, a regional food bank that we can use to address the issues of food insecurity that does pop up from time to time. So it's not just a problem in one country. Nigeria, 2 years ago, when Niger was not able to produce, or at least was hit by a food shock, we provided 32,000 metric tons of sorghum to Niger as a country, and that's the regional food buffer that I think we need to do. But I think the future for agriculture is good. It's bright for Africa if we look at agriculture from a very different lens that we're looking at it today.
Honorable Minister, sir, my name is Akin Adesina. I write for the News Agency of Nigeria. My own concern is about the biosafety bill. I believe it has been returned back to the Ministry of Justice to get the necessary paperwork done. Now, the question now is that what is your ministry doing to allay the fears of Nigerian farmers, other farmers, that we don't kind of experience what others are experiencing in the rest of the world, that if this bill is being passed, there's going to be a lot of problem for Nigerians and the farmers. Maybe it's knock a lot of the farmers out of business. So what are you doing? What advocacy are you doing? What sensitization are you doing on the part of the farmers and even the consumers?
Let me actually address a number of notions that people have about biotechnology, which is wrong. First is that, let's take, you got here via a plane, right? And you get on a plane and the pilot tells you, you're flying 50,000 feet above sea level. You know, relax, enjoy your flight. Make you feel that there's no risk, right? Life is all about looking at benefits and risks. It's about managing that. That's the role of public policy, balancing the benefits and also balancing the risks. We should not be afraid of science. We should not be afraid of growth. We must manage science to allow us to deal with complex, seemingly intractable problems. Today, we're dealing with issues of drought. We've never had that in climate change as we were having before. Floods. We're dealing with issues of post-harvest losses, low nutrition. So all these issues require that we apply science. And so that when people think that we should not apply science, I don't buy it. If you eat chicken today, chicken that you're eating is already genetically modified anyway, because it comes to your table, you get it 6 weeks. How do you think it gets to the table? The way it's done before is if you went with your chicken that roams, you know, it takes you a year. When it comes to the table, you can't, it's very small. So as Nigeria, we will not be a laggard when it comes to science, that's for sure. But we are going to manage the issues. So here are the things that we are doing to deal with that. First is applying biotechnology to issues of nutrition. So Pro-Vitamin A cassava, we've released in Nigeria. The orange flesh sweet potato we've released in Nigeria. Biofortified sorghum we have released in Nigeria. Today, we are also testing BT cotton. Nigeria, look, everybody selling cotton in the world uses BT cotton. BT cotton allows you to reduce your dependency on pesticides and the impact that that has on the lives of a farmer, right? In addition to the yield. So we need to actually do that. Of course, managing the biosafety issues is very crucial, and one must be responsive and responsible. And we are doing both. The biosafety bill has, been approved by our National Assembly. It will be approved to go ahead soon, and then that will allow us to be able to take advantage of modern tools of science and technology to grow more food and to open more possibilities for our farmers. The rest of the world is flying aircrafts. We are not going to travel on donkeys. Okay. Thank you very much.